It's time! Mark Watto Watson joins us, the ATM podcast. My name is Martin Devlin from the platform. Watto, we're going to be talking about Sky redundancies, 170 people, and God, I feel gutted for them as they lose their jobs while the woke CEO assigns hundreds of thousands of dollars to projects that are never going to return any investment, and this is the actual business cost of it. It's a cost in lives and redundancies. You were at the Maori Cup over the weekend, fabulous event, we'll talk about that. Bowden Barrett. What's happened to Bowden? He's had aliens invade the body. Sean Johnson. What's happened to Sean Johnson? He's playing out of his brain. Today FM, the collapse of and who is to blame, and also the swimming nationals.
Apologise to me!
But first and foremost, mate, let's start it on a happy, which is the Maori Cup, and you were there calling it on the weekend.
Yeah, look, it's an event that I've always wanted to do. I've always had a really strong affinity for secondary school sport. I just love the purity of it. I love the history and tradition that goes with so many schools. So Maori Cup, I will argue, is the biggest prize that you want to try and win in secondary school boys sport. It goes back to 1947, so 76 years this year. Actually won by my mob, Mount Abbott Grammar, back in 1947. They beat Sacred Heart that day. And since then, it's evolved. Only 17 schools in the history of the Maori Cup in the 76 years have actually ever won it. But it's the biggest secondary school competition in the Southern Hemisphere now. Almost 3,000 kids, sort of under 15s, under 16s, under 17s, and under 18s. And it's a week-long event that alternates between Karapiro one year and Lake Ruataniwha down there in Twizel every other year. And, you know, every single class of boat you can imagine, from the single sculls, the double sculls, the pairs, right through. But it does culminate with the two big races on the final day. For the girls, it's the Levin Jubilee Cup, and for the boys, it is the Maori Cup. And there was a lot of talk this year around Hamilton Boys High School, the defending champions, who are prepared to lose the battle to win the war. So they will have crews in the smaller classes of boats, but they're happy to pull out their boys come finals time to make sure that the powder's dry for when they need to step into the 8. And the other big talk was around St. Bede's, who have only ever won the Cup once, and that was back in 1991. And so, you know, they talked it up saying, oh, we think it's going to be St. Bede's versus Hamilton, even though Christ's College and St. Peter's and Christchurch Boys and these other great schools were all in that final. And, you know, it's like Martin very rarely does maybe the hype and the build-up actually, you know, follow through. But this did, and this ended up becoming one of the great races, arguably the greatest race in the history of the Maori Cup in the 76th edition. So Hamilton Boys High School, St. Bede's was separated in the finish. So they raced for 2,000 metres, was separated by 5/100ths of a second on the finish line.
Wow.
Nobody knew who had won it. 10,000 people going nuts. And initially, Hamilton Boys High School felt they'd got it, and they were celebrating. You could see St. Bede's commiserating. And then the official results came up and it went the other way. And it was just so much drama and so much theatre. And I've got to say, it's one of the best things I've called. We had a few challenges with audio and stuff as commentary team, but I've got to say it was one of the best things I've ever called.
And can people watch this anywhere? Can you get on? Is it on YouTube or anything? Can people watch this if they want to?
Yeah, they can. Look, Television One have been across it for 2 nights. I see Stuff Finey did something yesterday on it, showing the finish of it. And so you can go on YouTube, just put in Aon Māori Regatta, and they'll actually have just that. They'll actually just have the Maori Cup race itself, but they'll also, you can watch the 40-odd finals over the 2 days as well. But look, rowing, I think next year at the Olympic Games, talking to the rowing guys I was working with, I think it's going to be a tough one in Paris. I think we're lucky to win 2 medals. It's going to be a rebuilding phase. But when you look at the talent on display down there, I tell you what, you can understand why, for such a small country, we are a rowing powerhouse. On the girls' side, Rangiruru out of Christchurch, just dominant. First school in history to actually go first and second. So they had 2 crews in it, and they went first and second in the Levin Jubilee Cup. But yeah, I do encourage people, get on YouTube and watch this race. Just a street fight between just 2 warriors, and nothing in it. Unbelievable finish.
Apologise to me!
Let's talk about Sky TV then. This is the 180 reverse here, because this is where we put the hobnail boots on, and this is where somebody needs a good slap. And I'm looking at Sophie Maloney, who is the CEO of Sky TV. Now, I don't personally know the woman, but I'm just looking at the decisions that she makes, the politics that she plays, and wondering why she doesn't actually go and work in a government department. You've brought this up a couple of times before. What is the purpose of Sky TV? Is it to create the wokest organisation in business in this country, or is it to make money for their shareholders? Are they in business for business reasons? And a couple of weeks ago, Sophie was proudly patting herself on the back and sending out self-congratulatory press releases about the equality in senior management and the gender equality there, pouring money into a program called The Women's Game, which, I said, yeah, great idea, but is it ever going to pay for itself? No sponsors, of course, it's not going to pay for itself. Spending hundreds of thousands of dollars covering sports that are minority sports, and I'm not just picking on the women's sports here, but let's just look at Super Rugby, Picky. No crowds, no one's going along, there are no ratings, no one's interested in watching this, but pouring all of that money into that and being happy and to shout it to the world about, they're doing this, doing that. Well, the flip side of this is what we've just seen, and this is the cruel side of the business. 170 people get made redundant. That's a hell of a lot of lives and families now who their year has just been wrecked. It's like Today FM collapsing. It's just been wrecked. So on the one hand, you can waste money, and that's what I call it, because when you're in business, Mark, and you're spending money and you get no return on it, and there's no return coming back, it's called wasting money. You can waste money on all of that, and yet the actual cost of it is you're prepared to sacrifice 170 people. We don't know how many of those are women. You can pour all this money into women's sport, but then you sack a whole lot of women. I just don't get this, and I think that somebody in either business journalism or one of these mainstream media outlets needs to put these questions to the CEO. What is it your job actually is? Is it to tick rainbow boxes, or is it to make money for your shareholders?
Well, it should be to make money for your shareholders, and it hasn't made money for the shareholders for an awful long time, 24 cents a share, and that fluctuates a lot, down from once when it was $4. So you imagine people that have come in and bought shares at even $2, at $3, $4, and now it's sitting there at 24 cents, and they're waiting for that return. They're waiting for somehow to get their money back. And you're right, and suddenly Sky has become just a political platform for women's rights, and I think that's all it is. And it's not a good business model. This equity business model doesn't work, and that's been proven around the world. It just simply prejudices against better people, because you've got to have a quota system in place, so you're not employing the best people. And yeah, so all the money you're putting out, are you getting return on that? No, you are not. And yeah, it's incredibly disappointing.
Very sad. Very sad.
Sky's business model and why they are profitable, it's not because they're growing the business, it's not because they're growing advertising revenue, it's constantly because they are cutting costs. So that is the only reason they're profitable. And it's not just this last group of 170 employees, it's been going on before that. There was a big cull a couple of years ago where almost 200 other staff went, and then they sold a building out there in Mount Wellington, and all of this looks good. Oh, we've got this return, we've got this money, but it's not. You can only cut back so many people, and then the commercial reality needs to kick in. I mean, you talked about Today FM. I think one of the biggest problems with why Today FM didn't work is because, they thought they could take on News Talk ZB. They thought they could do it with some sort of left-leaning type genre, which just doesn't work. Proof again that if you think the woke model works, you'll go broke. But what also Today FM did, they went out there and typical of those running it, let's get television personalities. Let's go and get a Tova O'Brien. I mean, who the hell is Tova O'Brien in all seriousness? Because she gets mentioned by Jacinda Ardern, Jessica Tova. You sit there, you're good for a 30-second soundbite. You can edit it.
Never hosted a radio show in her life. And it was a boring show. There was no entertainment in it. I was speaking to a very prominent editor of one of the newspapers yesterday, and I asked him about this. We were arguing about it, and I said, did you ever listen to it? And he said, yeah, it was boring. I turned off a couple of times. And I said, that is the reason it failed. First and foremost, you have to have a breakfast radio host who is a breakfast radio host who can entertain and who can get an audience. Instead of saying that the management effed it, Tova, look at yourself in the mirror. You did. Because your responsibility is to get an audience. And an audience, Mark, is not walking around the office getting people blowing smoke up your backside and patting you on the back and going, oh, you're wonderful. The audience exists outside of your building. And none of these people seem to actually get this or realise it. And once again, the cost is, 90-something jobs and a whole lot of people that we know who are now out of work.
Yeah, but the other problem is when you go and get these so-called high-profile television people, all you actually end up doing, though, is having to pay inflated inflated salaries. So I'd imagine that the Duncan Garners, all of these would have been probably 300,000
Oh, 300,000
plus.
plus. Absolutely.
How are you going to get a return? Yet the irony is, if you actually look at MediaWorks' business model, if you actually look at their music stations, who actually have very, very good market share. I mean, The Rock.
Yeah, their music stations,
highly rated. The people that they brought through are actually pure radio people. I mean, Martin, you came from a radio background.
That's why I got the radio sport job. I was a breakfast radio host, mate. That's why Bill employed me.
You go look back on ZB, you look at Larry Williams, you look at Leighton Smith, they were pure radio people. I mean, you can go and look at NZME and look at their music stations. We saw a shift from NZME where their music stations, let's fill them up with television personalities.
And guess what's happened?
Let's go and get people like Tony Street. Let's go and get some of these people. And they don't rate. It doesn't turn into ratings. And yet on the other side, MediaWorks music stations are pure radio people. And this is where they just get it all wrong. They're on television, somehow it's going to rate.
Yeah, somehow it's
We're
not
that fickle here in New Zealand. We don't actually have genuine celebrities. Our celebrities are too accessible. You can see them in the supermarket. We don't have scale. And so it's this whole thing, isn't it? Just get the best people. Get the right people. And if the content's good, people will come. It's like a coffee shop. You don't need to be in Parnell to have a successful coffee shop. If you've got great coffee and great service, people start to hear about it. People find you, people hunt you down, and you can actually end up running a very, very good business just simply through getting the basics right.
And look, and you know, as this, you know, a lot of them are sitting there wailing. I'm just looking at themselves, going, "What you produced, the airwaves did not." By very clearly, whatever was coming out those airwaves was not actually translating into an audience that actually liked it in any kind of numbers.
But see, Sky are just following down the same path. It's this whole woke nonsense. It's this whole, what I keep saying, it's just this box ticking exercise that looks good on a PowerPoint presentation. When did we start? It's amazing how people are just dictated to now by about 5% of the audience, predominantly those people that run the humanities and the social sciences at universities in this country. It's appalling.
Apologise to me!
Let us turn our attention to a couple of big names that are both at the opposite end of the spectrum in terms of the performances being put out at the moment. I'm talking about Beauden Barrett and Shaun Johnson. Now, Beauden Barrett is not Beauden Barrett at the moment, and you could equally argue that the Shaun Johnson we're seeing is not the Shaun Johnson that we've been seeing for the last couple of years. What the hell is going on with these two people? One of them is playing out of his brain at the twilight of his career, and the other one is actually trying to find out who the hell he is, and it is to get any form whatsoever.
Oh, look, I don't think Beauden Barrett's been playing good rugby for the last 3 or 4 years. I think he's always been inconsistent. You know, it doesn't help when you're switching him from fullback to first 5'8". He's had opportunities to go and play in Japan. We've heard that every time you come back from Japan, no one actually ever comes back better. Look, the Blues need to play Perifeta at first 5. He's better at taking the ball to the line. He's a very, very good first 5'8". Zahn Sullivan at fullback, and you put Beauden Barrett on the bench. It's like, mate, he's not the player that he once was. Remember, what are we, 2023? It was 8 years ago that he scored that try in that World Cup final. 8 years is a long, long time for an athlete. And yes, he's brand Beauden, but yeah, sometimes you've got to make the tough calls. He's not the player that he once was. I think there's too much going on in his life. There's probably family as much as anything, young kids. There's also maybe the commercial side of it. But yeah, he's just, I mean, you
wouldn't pick him right now in the first 15 for the All Blacks.
First 5 for the All Blacks.
No, he's not. No, and I think that's quite. But what about Shaun Johnson though, who is just making every post a winner at the moment? Now I don't know whether this is going to continue, but you've got to be happy for the guy. Come on.
Yeah, no, look, I do. You know, I've said to you every week, Martin, I'm still reserved. You know, when they were down 20 points to nil, I was like, oh, God, here we go.
And everyone thought that.
It's going to go a 60-point walloping, and it's the Warriors of old, and credit to them. And look, two Warriors fans out there, look, I've been harsh on them. I'm allowed to be harsh. We're all allowed to be harsh on them because, you know, we like teams that win. We don't like teams that make excuses. And, you know, they're the ones that have forced us to be harsh on them. But look, I'm just pleased for Warriors fans. They're getting to smile. They're getting to celebrate that they're currently sitting second on the table. And yes, Shaun Johnson is running the cutter. He is running the show. But, you know, and hopefully it continues that the confidence breeds confidence and you get on that roll. What I loved too was was the post-match interview. We've
Yeah, it was
talked
good.
here, Martin, about sport and why nobody's going to watch it, and particularly rugby, because everything is so sanitized now. Everything is so manufactured. They're determined that we, the fan, are perfect, and therefore everything they present needs to be perfect. What we saw was Sean Johnson being Sean Johnson, talking about we talked some silly shit at halftime.
Yeah, brilliant, wasn't it?
And telling us that, and hey bro, and then cuddling his mates, and you could see the smile, and you go, you know what? There's some flaws,
real,
but
man.
we love the flaws.
We love
That's
the
what we
flaws,
want,
mate.
that
It's
because that
real.
is us. We
Yeah.
can relate to that more
Totally.
than this sort of being morally policed by this robotic rugby player that's been told what to say, because that apparently is what's going to get us as humans, who are all perfect, some level of engagement. It's quite the opposite. So look, a lot of really good things happening with the Warriors at the moment. Just for Warriors fans, I genuinely hope it continues, and I genuinely hope that there's some real reason to smile, and that big South Auckland community that have just been relentless supporters over the years are finally getting a return back on that investment.
Apologise to me!
And finally, mate, let's talk about the swimming nationals, all completed overnight. Have we found another potential superstar in Erica Fairweather?
Yeah, we have, to a degree. It's an interesting one, because she's always been a superstar, but she's yet to break 4 minutes for the 400 free. She'll go very close, but the problem is you've got Katie Ledecky, you've got Ariana Titmus, and I think it's Summer McKenzie out of Canada. Now, the 16-year-old Summer out of Canada, 16 years of age, has just set the world record, and she's going 3:56. Ariana Titmus goes 3:56. Katie Ledecky goes 3:56, 3:57. So she's still got to find another 4 seconds. Should we be excited? We should, but she's still got a lot of work to do to be genuinely in the conversation about being our next Daniel Loader. But pleasing to see. Look, I still have concerns over the way swimming is done in this country, particularly from the younger ages up through the teenage years. We actually haven't won a medal at the Olympic Games since 1996. We've had Lauren Boyle end up getting 4th. We've had the likes of Moss Burmester doing well. But we still actually haven't produced swimmers at the highest level consistently. And being a little bit involved in it, I still haven't seen much of a change in the way we're bringing our young athletes through. Martin, it's what we call a taught sport, so it's technique-based. It's all governed by hydrodynamics. But there seems to be this sort of mile mentality adopted by a lot of coaches. And the problem when you're just focusing on distance and miles, athletes are tired. And what happens when you're tired is you just reinforce bad habits in a sport that requires good habits. And so we're always going to throw athletes out. There's always going to be that one athlete that's going to pop up. If you throw enough, you're going to get one that pops out. But I would just like to see a little bit of a shift in the way we develop our young athletes and the way we are bringing them through. But yeah, look, I definitely think Erica Fairweather, she's an athlete that could follow in the footsteps of Kingsman, Moss, and potentially win a sort of a bronze medal in an outside lane. Olympic champion, I think she's a little bit off at the moment.
Devlin.
Down goes Fraser! Down goes Fraser!
The Platform.